Religious ethics of the Western faiths. In chapter 3 of the text, we turn to the Western religious faiths and we see how ethics plays out in them. And so we begin with the Tanak. The Tanak is essentially the Jewish Bible, and it's more or less the same as the Christian Bibles, except that the order is slightly different. Whereas the Christian Bibles tend to try to approach things in a chronological order, the Jewish Bible is arranged in more of a categorical fashion. And so you have the Tanak, which is made up of the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. And they make up the law, and that's where our focus is going to be here. But then you go into the Nebim, which are the writings of the prophets, and the Ketubim, which are other writings, many of those historical in nature. Within the Torah, you have the Mitzvot, which are presented. When we tend to think of the Mitzvot or the commandments, most people think of 10 commandments. But there's actually 613 commandments that are issued by God within the Torah, and all of these are considered the mitzvot. The 10 commandments that are given to Moses in Exodus 20 are essentially what we've referred to as the Decalog. And of course, when we think of God delivering the commandments to Moses, we tend to think of one of two things. Either we think of the classic Charlton Heston version of Moses in the 10 Commandments that plays every Easter, or we think of the very funny Mel Brooks version from History of the World Part 1, in which, of course, he starts off holding 15 commandments that have been given to him, and it becomes a little heavy, and he drops one, and so we end up with 10 commandments to obey. Anyway, if we look at the 10 commandments themselves, this is the short version of them. But what you'll notice when we look at those commandments is that the first 5 deal with our relationship to God, but the second 5 deal with our relationship to each other. The relationship of one human being to another is going to be key here, because that's what ethics is concerned with, of course. So starting with number 6 there, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet anything that is thy neighbor's. You know, if you think about those basic rules that are laid down, they're very similar to things that we've studied and seen before in the Eastern cultures. You know, do not kill. Of course, there is that basic value of life, and that life needs to be preserved, needs to be protected. And so, of course, we have rules against that. Do not commit adultery. Again, not having sex outside of marriage. Not having sexual encounters with someone other than your partner. Don't steal. Again, as we saw with the Jains, a very important, very prominent idea. Don't steal. Don't take what belongs to you. Don't bear false witness. So don't lie. Okay, again, we saw that idea of truthfulness within the Eastern philosophies. And don't covet anything that belongs to thy neighbor. Again, that goes back to the don't steal idea, basically. If you don't have the desire for what someone else possesses, then obviously you are not going to want to take it. So if we follow those basic tenets, those simple basic rules, then humanity should be able to interact with each other very nicely without any difficulties. The problem, of course, is that when we look at these, they seem pretty straightforward and pretty obvious, but human nature being what it is, we begin to corrupt them. And we start looking at these different interpretations. What do we mean by this? And one of the big questions is this one. Does it really imply do not kill, or does it imply do not murder? And some translations have kill, some translations have murder. And what would be the difference? Well, if you take the text to imply do not kill, then that would mean that you do not take life, period, of any kind, of any sort, under no circumstances. But if you say do not murder, murder is a very specific type of killing. It implies premeditation, it implies cold-bloodedness, that type of taking of a life. So what is meant by this commandment? Of course, it seems obvious, do not murder. Don't go out on a rampage and kill a bunch of people. Don't fly off the handle and kill someone in your rage. Don't murder another person. But when it comes to the issue of kill, then people say, well, wait a minute. There are times when killing becomes necessary. If you're a soldier on a battlefield, it's your duty to kill, just like we saw with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. If you are that soldier, it's your duty to kill your enemy. If somebody breaks into your home and your life is threatened, you have the right to protect yourself. And if you kill somebody in the process of doing that, you most likely, depending upon state laws, but most likely are going to be okay, because it was acting in self-defense. You were able to take that life. And then, of course, if you move beyond the realm of human beings, there's animals, right? So frequently, animals are being killed for one reason or another. Maybe because we simply don't want them and can't take care of them anymore. Maybe because we want to cook them and use them for food. So we tend to make all kinds of exceptions to this rule of kill. But if the commandment really is do not kill, then that would imply that we should not take a life at all. And, again, perhaps that might be the better approach for us to take. But it becomes a question of how could we do it within our modern world. Another question that's raised, of course, is the issue of do not steal. Of course, it's a good idea to say, let's not steal, let's not take what doesn't belong to us. But many people have argued exceptions to that as well. For example, Thomas Jefferson made the statement that if an individual were starving and the only way to get food to support yourself was to steal it, then you would be justified in stealing that food. So, again, we tend to make exceptions to these rules. We try to stretch them. We try to interpret them in our own way. And so corruptions will sink in. And this is, of course, the problem with the whole concept of God giving commands to mankind, is that as human beings in a temporal world, we tend to interpret things in our own way. We tend to corrupt them for our own purposes and our own understanding. And that's where our problems start to come into play. If we could simply look at those basic rules and follow them, we probably would be in really good shape, morally speaking. But we keep trying to manipulate them. We keep trying to work around them, and they become corrupt. This is why, as we'll see in the next lecture, that God chooses to send Jesus into the world as a form of himself, but to correct these errors, to correct these mistakes. And later, of course, God will send the Quran to Muhammad to correct the mistakes that are made from there. So time after time, we find in the Western world, just as in the Eastern world, God gives us these wonderful messages of morality that we could live by, but rather than doing so, we corrupt them for our own purposes. But God finds a way of continuing to try to put us back on the right track, but we keep screwing it up.